Nobody told you this. The argument has been going for nearly 2,000 years, and it has produced denominations, church councils, legislation from a Roman emperor, and divisions that have never healed. Saturday versus Sunday. Which day is the true Sabbath? Which camp has been faithful to the Scripture, and which camp has been in error since the Apostles? And somewhere inside all of that history, somewhere beneath 2,000 years of theological argument, the question that should have come first has never been asked in the way it needs to be asked. Not which day to attend services. Not which denomination got this right. The question is this: what does the word actually mean? And the answer to that question is not complicated. It is just in a different language than the one the debate has been held in. Because there is a word underneath this entire debate. A Hebrew word. The word the command was written in. The word God used. And that word has a definition. It has been sitting in a Hebrew lexicon the entire time this argument has been running. And when you go to that definition and read what the word actually says at its root, the Saturday versus Sunday debate begins to look like something completely different than what you were told it was. It begins to look like two sides arguing over which door to walk through when neither of them has ever stopped to ask what is on the other side. And the answer has been there the whole time. Now here is what I need you to understand before we go one step further. The debate about which day the Sabbath falls on is a debate conducted almost entirely in English words derived from Latin names for Roman planets. Saturday, Sunday. Neither of those is a Hebrew word. Neither of them appears in the original text of the commandment. Neither of them exists in the language the command was given in. And I am going to show you exactly why that matters. Because once you see it, the argument does not just get answered. The argument changes shape entirely. And that is exactly where we are going. Think about what that means. The most debated religious question in the history of Christianity is being argued in vocabulary, borrowed from the names of Roman planets. The word at the center of this is a Hebrew word, and it means something very specific. Stay with me, because by the time this video is finished, you are going to know 3 things that this debate has never given you. You are going to know what the Hebrew word, Shabbat, actually means at its root, what verb it comes from, and what that definition does to every assumption this debate has been built on. You are going to understand why neither Saturday nor Sunday is a concept that appears anywhere in the original biblical text of the command. And you are going to see what the commandment was actually pointing to. Not a calendar slot, not a day named after a Roman celestial body, something that was established before Israel existed as a nation, before Moses climbed a mountain, before this argument was even conceivable. If that is already hitting something in you, hit the like button right now and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already done that. Every time you do, this message reaches one more person who has been standing inside that debate their whole life without ever being shown what the Hebrew word underneath it actually says. Now let us go find out. Here is the argument as most people have heard it. On one side, you have the Saturday camp. The Sabbath commandment says to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. The 7th day is the Sabbath. The 7th day of the week is Saturday. Therefore, Saturday is the biblical Sabbath, and anyone who abandoned Saturday abandoned the law of God. On the other side, you have the Sunday camp. Jesus rose from the dead on the 1st day of the week. The early church gathered on the 1st day of the week. The resurrection changed everything, and Sunday is the Lord's day. Therefore, Saturday was the old covenant, and Sunday is the new. That is the debate. Most of you have heard a version of it. Some of you have been inside one of those camps your whole life. Some of you grew up in it. And here is the problem with both of them. They both start with a premise that neither side ever stops to examine. They both assume that the Sabbath command is fundamentally about a named calendar day, and they both use the exact same vocabulary to argue that point. Saturday, Sunday, both sides of a 2,000-year argument. Same vocabulary. But here is what most people completely miss. Those words are not in the Hebrew Bible. Not Saturday, not Sunday. The command that started this argument was written in Hebrew, and the Hebrew language does not name its days of the week the way the Roman world does. Look at how the Hebrew Bible actually labels the days of the week. The first day is Yom Rishon, the second day is Yom Sheni, the third day is Yom Shlishi, the fourth day is Yom Revi'i, the fifth day is Yom Chamishi, the sixth day is Yom Shishi. Every day of the week, from day 1 through day 6, is a number. Not a name, a number. And then the seventh day. The seventh day is the only day in the entire Hebrew week that has a name instead of a number. And that name is not Saturday. It is not a reference to a Roman planet. It is a Hebrew word. The word is Shabbat. It is the only named day. Every other day in the Hebrew week is simply a count. Now here is what I need you to understand about that before we go any further. In modern Hebrew, right now today, Saturday is still called Shabbat. Sunday is still called Yom Rishon, the first day. The Hebrew language never borrowed the Roman planetary naming system. It kept its own. And that means the Hebrew text of this commandment is not talking about Saturday, a day named after the Roman planet Saturn. It is talking about a day that has its own Hebrew name, and that name carries its own Hebrew meaning, a meaning that neither side of this debate has ever made the center of the argument. So the real question is not which planetary day name the commandment is attached to. The real question is what the word Shabbat actually means, and that question has a precise answer. It is in the lexicon right now, and when you go to it, everything about how this command reads begins to shift. That is exactly where we are going next, and the answer is going to change the way you have been reading this command your whole life. The word is in the lexicon. Right now, today, if you open any standard Hebrew reference, you will find it sitting there with a definition that changes the entire debate. And nobody building the Saturday versus Sunday argument has made this definition the center of the conversation. So here it is. The Hebrew root is 3 consonants: Shin, Bet, Tav. In Hebrew, that is SHBT. Those 3 letters form the backbone of every word in this family: the verb, the noun, every derivative. And the verb form, spelled Shabbat and transliterated as Shabbat, is assigned Strong's Concordance number H7673. This is where the investigation has to begin. Not with a calendar, with a verb. Look at what Strong's says the primary definition of H7673 is. And I need you to read this slowly. To repose, that is desist from exertion. Read that again. Desist from exertion. Not sleep. Not recover. Not replenish depleted strength. Desist. Stop. The concept at the core of this word is the act of ceasing to do something you were doing. That is the primary meaning. That is what this word says at its root. Now here is what I need you to understand before we go any further. There is a difference between resting because you are tired and stopping because the work is complete. The word Shabbath carries both senses in Hebrew scripture, but the weight of the definition falls on the second one, ceasing. The Brown Driver Briggs lexicon, one of the most authoritative Hebrew lexicons in existence, defines H7673 as to cease, desist from exertion. The primary concept is cessation, not recuperation, not restoration of depleted strength. Stopping. And this matters. Because when the argument is that God rested on the 7th day, and therefore you must observe Saturday or Sunday, the word underneath that argument is a word that does not primarily mean recuperative rest. It means stopping a thing that was in motion. God was not tired on the seventh day. God does not get tired. Omnipotence does not deplete. What God did on the seventh day of creation is exactly what the verb says. He ceased. He stopped. He desisted from the exertion of creating. Look at how many different English words the translators used to render this single Hebrew verb across the different places it appears in the text. Cease. Cause to fail. Keep Sabbath. Leave. Put away. Put down. Rest. Rid. Still. Take away. Every one of those English words carries the same underlying reality. Something that was happening is no longer happening. An action has ended. A motion has stopped. Whatever the specific context, the semantic heart of Sabbath is this. The thing stops. And now look at what the noun does with that verb. Strong's H, 7676, Shabbat. The noun derived directly from the verb Shabbath, and its definition is exactly what you would expect. Cessation, the Sabbath. The noun takes the act of ceasing and turns it into the name of a day. Not a name borrowed from a planet. Not a name honoring a celestial body. A name that says, this is the day when the ceasing happens. This is the day defined by what does not occur on it. The name is the action. That is the structural difference between how Hebrew names its seventh day and how Rome named its days of the week. Rome said, this day belongs to Saturn. This day belongs to the sun. Hebrew said, this day is the stopping, and the first time God performs that action in the Scripture. The way he does it is going to change the entire frame of where this command comes from. That is exactly where we are going next. Before there was a commandment, the Word existed. Before there was a nation called Israel, the Word existed. Before Moses climbed a mountain, before a law was carved into stone, before anyone could argue about whether that law required Saturday or Sunday, the verb appeared for the first time in the entire Bible. And it did not appear in a legal code. It appeared in the story of creation, and God was the one who performed it. We are in the second chapter of Genesis. The 6 days of creation are complete. Heaven and earth, light and darkness, sea and land, living creatures, the breath of life in a body made from the ground. 6 days of work. And now the text moves to the seventh. And this is where the Hebrew verb we examined in the last chapter appears for the first time anywhere in Scripture. Here is what Genesis 2:2 says, and on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. In the Hebrew, the word translated rested is vayeshbot. It is transliterated vayeshbot, and it comes directly from the root we have been tracing. Shabbath. H. 767-3. To cease, to desist from exertion. God did not rest on the seventh day because he was depleted. God rested on the seventh day because he stopped. And look at what the text calls this day. Not Saturn's day. Not a name from the Roman planetary calendar that would not exist for another 15 centuries. The text calls it Yom HaShevi'i, the seventh day. An ordinal, a position in a sequence, the seventh in a series of 7. No planet, no deity, a number. Now here is what I need you to understand about the very next verse, because it is the one that sets the pattern for everything that follows. Genesis 2:3. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. Look at the reason. God made the seventh day holy, because on it he rested. Because on it he performed the act of Shabbath. The day is holy because of what happened on it. Cessation. Stopping. The act of ceasing from the work of creating. This is the foundation the commandment will later be built on. But right now, in Genesis 2, there is no commandment. There is no Israel. There is no Sinai. There is no covenant signed with a nation. There is only God, stopping on the seventh day, blessing it, hallowing it, defining it entirely by what he did on it. And what he did on it was cease. Stay with me, because this is the point the entire debate has missed. The Saturday versus Sunday argument has been asking which planetary day name the commandment belongs to. But the commandment points back here, to this moment, to a 7-day sequence in which the seventh position is marked not by a planet's name, but by God's own action. The pattern of ceasing is older than every law ever written about it, older than Israel, older than every council that would later argue about it, older than Saturn having a day named after him. Before any of that existed, God stopped, and when he did, he called that day holy. The word for what he did is the word we have been tracing through this entire investigation, and the next time it surfaces in the text, it is not at Sinai. It is before Sinai, and what it is doing there changes the entire picture of where this command comes from. That word has been moving through the text. It started as a verb in Genesis 2, God himself performing the act of ceasing on the seventh day. And now the text moves forward. Israel is no longer in Egypt. They have crossed the sea. They are in the wilderness, somewhere between Ulim and the mountain of Sinai, and the commandments, the stone tablets, the mountain wrapped in fire and cloud, the finger of God carving law into rock, have not yet come. Sinai is still ahead of them. The law has not been given, and yet the word is about to appear. This is Exodus chapter 16. God provides manna, bread from heaven. Every morning it falls on the ground, and every morning the people go out and gather it. And on the sixth day, Moses gives them specific instructions. Gather double, because the day that follows is different from every other day in the week. And what Moses says about that coming day is the first time in the entire Hebrew Bible that the noun Shabbat appears. Not at Sinai, not in the Ten Commandments, here, in a wilderness, before the law exists, Exodus 16:23. Moses tells the people what YHWH has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to YHWH. The Hebrew phrase is Shabbaton Shabbat Koda SH, Shabbaton Shabbat Kodesh, a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to YHWH. Look at what the noun is doing in this sentence. It is not assigning a planetary name to the day. It is not pointing to a position on a Roman calendar. It is describing the character of the coming day. What that day is. A day of ceasing. A day of solemn stopping. Before any commandment has been carved into stone, the noun Shabbat has already named the day by what happens on it. Now here is what I need you to understand about what this means. The noun Shabbat appears before the commandment at Sinai formalizes it. That means the Sabbath is not a day that the law invents. The law will command it. But the character of the day, the cessation, the stopping, the solemn rest, precedes the command. The pattern was established in Genesis 2 when God performed the act of ceasing on the seventh day. And now, in the wilderness, before the mountain, the people encounter a day that already has a name. And that name is not about a position on a Roman calendar. It is about what the day is. This is what the entire Saturday versus Sunday debate has stepped over. The commandment at Sinai is not creating something new from nothing. It is pointing back to a pattern that predates the law, back to a word the people already knew before they reached the mountain, back further still to the second chapter of the Bible, where God himself stopped and called the seventh day holy by what he did on it. The command will say, remember. And the reason it says remember is because there was already something there to remember. Before we read that commandment word by word, I want to stop right here. If this is already shifting the frame for you, if you can feel how the vocabulary of this debate has never matched the language the Bible actually uses, hit the like button right now and subscribe to this channel if you have not done that yet. Share this with someone who has spent their whole life inside the Saturday versus Sunday argument, because in the next chapter, the commandment speaks for itself, in the language it was written in, and what it actually says is not what most people have been told. Now we arrive at the text itself, not the background, not the etymology, not the wilderness, the commandment. Exodus 20. The mountain, the fire and the smoke and the sound of a trumpet growing louder, the people standing at a distance, Moses ascending into the cloud. This is the text both sides of this debate have been citing for nearly 2,000 years. This is what the argument was built on. Let us read what it actually says in the language it was actually written in. The command begins with a single Hebrew verb, zakhor, zakfor. And before we go any further into this text, that verb needs to stop you, because it is not the word you would use to introduce a brand new concept. Zakhor means remember. It is an active, deliberate, backward-pointing memorial word. And when a command opens with the word remember, it is telling you that the receiver already has a reference point. You do not command someone to remember something they have never known. The first word of this commandment is not establishing something new. It is calling the people back to something already in place, something already known before they reached this mountain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Exodus 28. The Hebrew is this, Zakvor ayet ivom hashabat lekadshvo, Zachor et yom hashabat lekadesho. The command points backward, and after everything we have seen in this video, the reason that verb is there is now entirely legible. There was already a pattern. Genesis 2, the wilderness of Exodus 16. The noun appearing before Sinai came into view. The commandment is not inventing the Shabbat. It is commanding the people to remember what the Shabbat already was. Now move to verse 10. The seventh day is a Sabbath to YHWH, your God. Look at what the command calls the day. Not Saturn's day. Not the day at the end of the Roman planetary week, the seventh day. That is the designation, an ordinal position in a 7-day cycle. The seventh in a series of 7, and the name it pairs with that ordinal is the word we have been tracing through this entire video, Shabbat. The day defined by cessation. Think about what the command has done here. It has named the day by its number and by the word that describes what happens on it. No planet appears in this text, not one word of Roman planetary vocabulary anywhere in this commandment. But here is what I need you to see in verse 11, because this is where the commandment gives its own reason for itself. For in 6 days YHWH made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. The commandment reaches back into Genesis 2 and names God's own act of ceasing as the theological basis for the command. The logic is direct. God did this, so you do this. The pattern God set in the creation week is the pattern the command asks Israel to mirror. And what is the pattern? Not a planetary day name. Not Saturday. The pattern is the ceasing itself, the stopping, the Shabbath. This is the text, every word of it. And not one of those words is Saturn. Not one of those words is a Latin derivative of a Roman planet. The command is built on an ordinal number, a Hebrew word that means cessation, a memorial verb pointing backward to creation, and a theological grounding in what God himself did on the 7th day. The Saturday versus Sunday debate has been fought in vocabulary this commandment never once used, and there is a second version of this command in the Torah. It uses a different verb, a different theological grounding, and it still does not say Saturday. The same commandment appears twice in the Torah, The Saturday versus Sunday debate quotes both versions, but there is something inside the difference between them that the debate has never made the center of the argument. And it should have, because when you place these two texts side by side and read the Hebrew verb that opens each one, you discover that the command is doing two entirely different things in its two tellings, and neither of those things has anything to do with a Roman planet. You already know the first version, Exodus 20. The mountain, the verb zachor. Remember, the command to recall the creation pattern, to mirror what God did on the seventh day of the first week. That was the grounding of the Exodus version. But Moses gives the commandments a second time in the book of Deuteronomy. He is recounting what happened at Sinai before the people cross into the promised land. And when he reaches the Sabbath command, the verb at the front of the sentence changes. Deuteronomy 5:12. The Hebrew is shamvor et ivom hashabbat lakad eshvo. Shamor et yom hashabbat lekadesho. Not zakihor. Shamor. The word means to keep, to observe, to guard. It is not a memorial verb. It is a protective verb. Shamor is the word you would use for a guard at a gate, a shepherd watching over a flock, someone charged with protecting something valuable from being lost or taken away. Exodus said, "Look back and remember what God did and do the same." Deuteronomy says, "Hold this, guard it, maintain it, do not let it go." Same commandment, different word, different posture entirely. Now here is what I need you to understand about both of these verbs. Neither Zachor nor Shamor is assigning a planetary name to the day. Neither one says, "This day belongs to Saturn." Neither one tells you which position in the Roman planetary week the Sabbath falls on. Both of them name the day the same way. The seventh day, the seventh ordinal position in a 7-day cycle. And the word they pair with that ordinal is still Shabbat, still the word that means cessation. Two different verbs. Same day. Same word. No planet anywhere in either text, but there is something else in Deuteronomy that the Saturday versus Sunday debate almost never leads with. The theological grounding of this version is completely different from Exodus 20. Exodus grounds the Sabbath in creation. Deuteronomy grounds it in redemption. Listen to verse 15. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and YHWH, your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand. The same command that was grounded in God's act of ceasing at creation is now grounded in Israel's deliverance from slavery. The day of stopping is also the day that declares, "You are no longer a slave. Slaves do not get to stop. Their labor belongs to someone else. Free people stop." And the Sabbath, in the Deuteronomy version, is the weekly declaration that the people who observe it are not owned by their work. They are free. Think about what that means for the debate. Two versions, two verbs, one for remembering and one for guarding. Two theological reasons, one rooted in creation and one rooted in redemption. And one fact that holds constant through both of them: neither version names a Roman planet. Both say the seventh day. Both say Shabbat. Both are commanding Israel to cease. In Hebrew vocabulary, that has no planetary day name anywhere inside it. And there is one more passage in the Torah about this day that both sides of this debate have consistently avoided, because what it says constrains the argument in a way neither camp wants to deal with. There is one more passage in the Torah about the Sabbath, and almost nobody in the Saturday versus Sunday debate quotes it. Not the Saturday camp, not the Sunday camp. Because quoting it honestly forces both sides to answer a question they would rather not face. The passage is in Exodus 31. It comes after the commandments have been given. And what God says about the Sabbath here goes further than anything in Exodus 20 or Deuteronomy 5. Further and more specific. And that specificity is the thing both sides have been quietly avoiding. Exodus 31:13. For WH speaks to Moses and says, "You shall keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, YHWH, sanctify you." The Hebrew word translated sign is avot, OT. It is one of the most significant words in the Hebrew Bible. A sign in the covenant vocabulary of the Hebrew Scriptures is not a symbol in the vague modern sense. It is a formal covenant marker, a visible, recurring declaration of a specific relationship between two parties. The rainbow is an OT between God and all living creatures after the flood. Circumcision is an OT between YHWH and Abraham's descendants. And here, in Exodus 31, the Sabbath is named as an OT between YHWH and Israel. And then verse 17 removes any ambiguity about who this sign is for. It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel. Not between God and humanity in general, between YHWH and the people of Israel. The Sabbath, as defined in the Mosaic covenant, is a covenantal marker for a specific people in a specific covenant relationship. Now here is what I need you to understand about why this matters. The Saturday versus Sunday debate is primarily a debate about which day Gentile Christians should observe, and the text that most directly addresses the formal institution of the Sabbath as a covenant obligation says explicitly that it is a sign between YHWH and Israel. That is not a minor footnote. That is what the text actually says. And neither camp in this debate tends to lead with it, because if you are on the Saturday side, Exodus 31 raises the question of whether Gentiles were ever party to that specific covenant sign. And if you are on the Sunday side, you still have to account for why you are arguing about which day to observe a sign that the text assigned to a particular covenant people. But here is what both sides are also missing, and this is the distinction that the entire debate collapses when it reduces everything to a calendar argument. There are two different things in the Bible that carry the concept of Shabbat. One of them is the Mosaic covenant sign. That is Exodus 31. Given to Israel, specific to the covenant YHWH made with that nation at Sinai. The other is the creation pattern. That is Genesis 2. God ceasing on the seventh day, before any covenant existed, before Israel existed as a nation, before Moses climbed any mountain, before the word was ever formalized into a command or assigned as a sign. Those two things are not the same thing. And the Saturday versus Sunday debate collapses both of them into one argument about which Roman day name to attach to a Hebrew word. Before we look at what happened historically, at how that collapse occurred, at the councils and the emperors and the centuries of institutional shift that produced the debate we have inherited, there is one more layer of evidence to examine. The question of what the original Hebrew naming system actually looked like compared to the Roman planetary week that replaced it in Christian vocabulary. And when you see that comparison laid out side by side, the scale of what happened to this conversation becomes impossible to ignore. Now lay the two systems side by side, because this is the comparison that makes everything visible. This is where the source of the confusion stops being abstract and becomes something you can see directly, name by name, day by day. Here is how the Hebrew Bible names the days of the week. The first day, Yom Rishon. The second day, Yom Sheni. The third day, Yom Shlishi. The fourth day, Yom Revi. The fifth day, Yom Chamishi. The sixth day, Yom Shishi. 6 days. 6 numbers. 6 ordinal positions in a 7-day cycle. Not one of those names belongs to a deity. Not one of them points to a planet. They are the Hebrew equivalents of first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, a counting system. And then the 7th day, the only day in the entire Hebrew week that has a name instead of a number. Shabbat. the day defined by what happens on it, cessation. The 7-day Hebrew week has exactly one named day, and that name means stopping. Now here is what the Roman Empire did with the 7-day cycle. They assigned each day to a celestial body, a planet, a deity whose name and domain gave the day its character in the Roman imagination. The first day became solis dies, the day of the sun. The second day became lunae dies, the day of the moon. The third day became martis dies, the day of Mars. The fourth day became Mercury dies, the day of Mercury. The fifth day became Iovis dies, the day of Jupiter. The sixth day became Veneris dies, the day of Venus. And the seventh day became Saturni dies, the day of Saturn. Every day of the week assigned to a pagan deity, every day named for something the Roman world worshipped or tracked in the sky. Those Roman planetary names are where Saturday and Sunday come from. Saturday is Saturni dies. Sunday is solis dies. They are not Hebrew words. They are not translations of Hebrew words. They are Latin names for Roman celestial deities overlaid onto a 7-day cycle that the Hebrew world had been using for centuries with an entirely different vocabulary. The Hebrew system named the days by counting. The Roman system named the days by their patron deities. These are not two versions of the same thing. They are two fundamentally different ways of organizing 7 days, and only one of them is in the Bible. Now here is what I need you to see clearly. When Latin-speaking Christianity inherited the question of which day the Sabbath commandment required, they answered it using the Roman planetary framework that surrounded them. The 7th day of the Hebrew week, Shabbat, became Saturday in the Latin world because the Roman name for the 7th day was Saturni dies. And when the first day of the week became the preferred Christian gathering day, it was called Sunday, because the Roman name for the first day was solis dies, the day of the sun. The debate that Christianity has been running for nearly 2,000 years, Saturday versus Sunday, is a debate between two Roman planet names about a Hebrew command that contains neither of them. And here is the confirmation that requires no commentary at all. In modern Hebrew, right now today, Saturday is still called Shabbat. Sunday is still called Yom Rishon, the first day. The Hebrew language never adopted the Roman planetary naming system. The language the Sabbath commandment was written in does not call the 7th day Saturn's day. It never did. The debate did. And what needs to be asked now is how that happened, when it happened, and who made it happen. That is exactly where we are going. So how did it happen? How did a debate about a Hebrew word get translated entirely into Roman planetary vocabulary? How did the 7th day become Saturday, and the first day become Sunday in the language of Christian theology? The answer is not a single moment. It is a documented process, and it took 3 centuries. Let us walk through the historical record. The earliest Christian documents do not frame the question as Saturday versus Sunday. That is important to notice. Revelation 1:10, written in the late 1st century, mentions the Lord's Day. That is the designation, not a planetary name. The Lord's Day. Around 100 AD, a document called the Didache, one of the earliest non-biblical Christian texts we possess, instructs believers, "On the Lord's day of the Lord come together, break bread and hold Eucharist." The Lord's Day. Still not Saturday versus Sunday language, still not a Roman planet name. Around 110 AD, Ignatius of Antioch writes in his letter to the Magnesians that believers are no longer observing the Sabbath, but living in the observance of the Lord's Day. He is contrasting 2 practices, but he is still using the phrase Lord's Day. The Roman planetary vocabulary has not arrived yet. The first explicit theological argument for the first day over the Sabbath comes around 155 AD from Justin Martyr in his first apology, chapter 67. He writes that Christians gather on the first day because it is the day on which God made the world and the day on which Jesus Christ rose from the dead. 2 reasons: creation and resurrection. And notice, he still calls it the first day, the ordinal, the Hebrew week's Yom Rishon. He is making a theological argument using the counting vocabulary of the original text, not the planetary vocabulary of Rome. Then comes Constantine, March 7th, 321 AD. Constantine issues an edict establishing a weekly rest day for the Roman Empire. And now watch the language shift. He does not call the day the Lord's Day. He does not call it the first day of the week. In his own edict, Constantine calls it Venerabili Dia Solis, the venerable day of the sun. Solis dies. That is the Roman planetary name. The day of the sun. Sunday in the planetary vocabulary. A Roman emperor using Roman vocabulary for a Roman civil decree. The planetary naming system, which had no place in the original Hebrew command and no place in the earliest Christian texts, is now the official language of the law. And then, 40 years after Constantine, the Council of Laodicea, in approximately 363 to 364 AD issues Canon 29. Christians are formally forbidden from resting on the Sabbath. They are required to honor Sunday instead. This is the first time a church council issues an explicit prohibition against Sabbath observance. Not a preference, not a pastoral recommendation. A prohibition, 3.5 centuries after the apostles. The debate that was never in the Hebrew text has now hardened into institutional law, enforced in vocabulary the apostles never used, and built on a Roman planetary framework the commandment never mentioned. That is the historical record. A first-day gathering emerging in the early documents. A theological justification forming by the mid-2nd century. A Roman emperor formalizing it in planetary language in the 4th century, and a church council enforcing it by prohibition 40 years after that. Now the question is, what the apostolic writings themselves actually said about the Sabbath before any of this happened, because the New Testament does not settle this debate the way either side claims it does. Now we come to the New Testament, because this is where both camps believe they hold their strongest ground. The Saturday camp points to the Gospels and says Jesus kept the Sabbath, the apostles kept the Sabbath, nothing was ever changed. The Sunday camp points to the resurrection and the gatherings on the first day of the week and says the center of worship moved, and both of them are reading the Greek text as if it settles the question. It does not. And the reason it does not is the same reason nothing in this debate has ever settled it. The word is still there. The Hebrew word is still sitting underneath the Greek, and it still does not name a day. Here is something almost nobody points out. When you open the Greek New Testament and find the word translated Sabbath, the word is Sabbaton. And Sabbaton is not a native Greek word the writers invented. It is the Hebrew word, Shabbat, carried directly across into Greek, a loan word. Greek already had its own vocabulary for the days. It already had the planetary system Rome would later formalize, and the New Testament writers did not reach for that system when they wrote about this day. They reached back and pulled the Hebrew word across, almost unchanged, still pointing at the act and not at a planet. And watch what happens when those same writers describe the day of the resurrection. They do not call it the day of the sun. They write a phrase that means, literally, the first of the week. The first day counted from the Sabbath. Even describing the morning the tomb was found empty, the calendar they count on is the Hebrew one. The week still orbits the seventh-day cessation. The planetary names are simply not in the text. Not on the Saturday side, not on the Sunday side. The vocabulary of this entire argument is absent from the very pages it claims to be built on. So where does the Lord's Day language come from? Because it is real, and it is early. The phrase appears in the book of Revelation. It appears in a first-century manual called the Didache. It appears in a letter Ignatius of Antioch wrote around the year 110. By the year 155, Justin Martyr is describing Sunday gatherings in writing and explaining why, that it is the first day on which God made the world and the day Jesus rose. That is a real practice with a traceable beginning. But notice exactly what it is, and what it is not. It is a commemoration forming alongside the older observance. It is not a renaming of the Hebrew word. None of these early writers say the seventh day stopped being Shabbat. None of them say the word now means something else. What was added was a new day of assembly, layered on top, for a new reason. The question of what Shabbat means and the question of which day Christians gathered are two different questions. The debate fused them into one. The text never did. This is why the New Testament cannot settle the Saturday versus Sunday fight. It was never having that fight. It carries the Hebrew word forward intact, counts its weeks from the seventh-day cessation, and records a resurrection commemoration beginning to form, all at once, with no contradiction, because none of it depends on a planetary name. The collision only happens later, when the cessation word and the planet Saturn get pressed into the same square on a Roman calendar. And in the next chapter, we finally stand back and see the whole shape of what we have traced, and ask what it actually asks of you. So let us stand back now and look at the whole shape of it. Because we have traced one word across the entire Bible, from its first appearance to its survival in Greek, and the picture it makes is nothing like the argument we inherited. It started before there was a law. In Genesis, before there was a nation, before there was a mountain or a tablet of stone, God performed an action on the seventh day. He stopped. And the word for what he did is the word we have been following the whole way, shin, bet, tav, cessation. He did not name the day after himself. He did not name it after a planet, because no planet had a day named after it yet. He performed an act and called the day of that act holy. The word was a verb before it was ever anything else. Then it moved into the commandment. Twice, once grounded in creation, once in deliverance from Egypt. Two different verbs opening two different versions, and not once, in either, a planetary name. Both said the seventh day. Both said Shabbat. Both commanded a people to cease. Then it went further still, in Exodus 31, where the day is called a sign, woven into the identity of a people, far heavier than a box on a calendar. And then we laid the two naming systems side by side and saw the whole confusion at its source. Hebrew counted its days, first day, second day, third day, all the way to the seventh, which it did not number but named for the act, Shabbat, the stopping. Rome named its days for gods and planets, Saturn's day, the sun's day, and when the Roman system was pressed down on top of the Hebrew week, the day of ceasing got a new label stamped over it. Saturn's day, Saturday. The first day became the sun's day, Sunday. The cessation word disappeared under a planet, and the argument that followed was fought entirely in the language of the label, never in the language of the meaning. That is the whole story. A Hebrew verb, buried under a Roman planetary name, and 2,000 years of people fighting over the name, while the verb sat untouched in the lexicon the entire time. The Saturday camp and the Sunday camp have been arguing about which square on Rome's calendar the commandment lands on. And the commandment was never about a square on a calendar. It was about an act. It does not ask which planet owns the day. It asks whether you will stop. So here is the question this word actually puts in front of you, the one the debate was built to avoid. Not which day, not whose name, whether you have ever actually stopped, whether there is a single day in your week where you set down the work, the producing, the earning, the endless motion, the way God set it down in the very first week of the world, Because that is what the word is asking for. That is what Shabbat means. It is not Saturday. It is not Sunday. It is the stopping. And you can argue about the calendar for another 2,000 years, and never once do the thing the word actually commands. If this changed the way you read that commandment, if you have spent your whole life inside the Saturday versus Sunday argument, and are only now seeing the word underneath it, hit the like button and subscribe so this reaches one more person standing in that same place. And the next time someone asks you, which day is the true Sabbath, you will know the question itself is built on a word nobody bothered to read. The Sabbath was never about Saturday or Sunday. It was about the stopping.